Ladies and gentlemen, when you're trying something and it's not working, change the plan. Sounds simple enough. It is so hard to do. It is so hard to do. Now just imagine something with me. Imagine after years and years of effort, you finally achieved your dream job. I mean, this is it. This is what I've lived for. Then you have a violent altercation occurs on the job. This is an actual life and death battle. As a result, you have nightmares, you have panic attacks, you have flashbacks. You can't do this job you spent your whole life doing. Your dream job is over, and so is your identity. Now what? My name is Frank Zaccari. This is Life Altering Events. We're going to talk about energy, healing, and integrative wellness today. This is one of our second in this series. And until recently, very few people knew what PTSD was. They said, oh, this happens to soldiers. I'm not a soldier. I don't have to worry about it. The medical and the mental health communities, they treat symptoms. Traditional medicine has not done real well, not been very effective. Now, COVID comes along, and the isolation and the frustration and the additional anxiety, we're going to see far more cases of PTSD. So as I said in the beginning, if it's not working, change the plan. That's what my next guest did. Shane Flanagan, who's lived through this nightmare that I described, he has come out the other side. We're going to hear his story right now. Shane, welcome to Life Altering Events.
Thanks for having me, Frank, and hello to your listeners and viewers, wherever they may be. Thanks for having me, truly.
It's a pleasure. Shane, you and I spoke a little while back, a week or so, and share with us what happened in this pre-PTSD situation. What were you doing, and how did you get this dream job?
Well, I grew up as I guess they're calling it something different nowadays, but I grew up as a learning disabled child, and for some reason, it plagued me with educational problems, and for some reason, my neighbors all around my neighborhood, and there must have been 5 of them, all became local police officers, and I remember as a young boy standing in the doorway watching their cruisers pull into their mother's house and so on, and I stood there until they leave, and I'd jump up and down and wave at them, and they would slow down and wave at me, and my heart, it was like a celebrity that I had just waved at me, and so my mother tried to deter me. She said, well, with your learning disabilities, you could, why don't you just go sweep floors at your dad's factory where he works? And I said, no, Mom. I said, I can't do that. I want to be a police officer. So it was from that young age that I was determined, and I'm talking from the age of, I would say, 8 or 9 years old. I was determined to do that dream job. And an opportunity, as I grew and I went through the private security to gain experience, and I took law classes and so forth. I did everything I was supposed to do, and along came the opportunity to apply to our local police force. And I did, and they accepted me. And I was a reserve police constable. They call them here where we are. And so for 8 years, rode in a cruiser, night shift mainly, street patrol, car chases. It was everything and more. And you were a superstar. If you got out of the car at a nightclub because there had been, say, a fight, let's say, all the girls wanted to be hanging around you, and it was like being a rock star for me. And I said, this is even better than I thought. That was until we had to go to call after call after call, and the dispatcher would load the calls up, and we would never really get into some proactive policing. We're always responding, and I didn't know that. I didn't know that about that job. It was a response-based system as opposed to the old model, which I thought it would be, where you're sneaking around and the bad guys are sneaking around and you run into them. And so I thought to myself at that point, I had worked undercover drugs with the RCMP here in Canada and our local police force on a joint task force at a very young age. I was put in a taxi and I would be buying drugs as the taxi driver. And I was sent into homes and all kinds of different situations that, and no, without wires or anything like that you see on TV, they just had cars sitting around the area. And I remember they told me, you remove your baseball hat if you get a big load and we'll come in. Well, I was so happy, I was sweating. You know, when I get happy, I sweat. And I was sweating, and not out of fear, but out of, I can't believe I'm experiencing and doing all of this. Along the way came an opportunity to be a pioneer in Canada here, in St. Catharines, in Niagara Falls, in the area that I lived. And that I had a vision to go and create a private security firm that had security guards that were trained by actual police officers in their powers of arrest, and that we would be we were at the time the only security firm ever in this area to create such a security / private policing model. I dressed my cars up to look like police cars. I put uniforms on my guards to look like police uniforms. I gave it all the look and feel of what I had experienced over 8 years and introduced that into the community. Caught on like wildfire. Newspaper was all over me. I was in parades with my patrol car and people were screaming out my name, and I was 25 years old or a little bit older, and I said, you know, this is living the dream. This is. So I'm running my own security company. I left the public police profession, and little did I know that my going in the newspaper was causing some concern, because neighborhoods were then contracting us to patrol entire neighborhoods as opposed to the police. This was rattling the cage of the upper echelon.
I'll bet.
And of the police department. So I was, you know, I went, the guys in the street loved me. Management, because of the way I was so out there, well, not so much. But anyway, I was doing my thing. And I remember my wife saying to me 2 weeks prior to the event that ended it all, she said to me, she said, you should come off the street now. You've been on there a long time. Let your staff work it. And I said, but I love going out and catching bad guys. I'd make 3 or 4 arrests a night. This is how I felt policing should be done in my mind. So I've got a young trainee that decides he's going to come and train with me. And he's from the Canadian military. In fact, he's fresh out of the Canadian military. And it was his first night. And I, like most of the people that I trained, I was going to train him personally. We're sitting on a school board property. And we were contracted to provide security at night to schools. And as I was showing him what to write in his book, his notebook, along came, and this is in July of 2003 now, along came 2 guys. As I'm sitting there in a fully marked patrol car, headlights on, sitting in the parking lot, these 2 men in their late 40s enter the property, and I can see clearly they're both drinking beer. And I said to the young fella I was training the Canadian Forces, Armed Forces fella, I said, listen, this is going to be really easy. I've done this 1,000 times. I said, we're just going to ask him to leave. Gentlemen, would you come over here, please? I got out and said, 1 minute. One of them came over and stood by the front of my car. The other one stayed probably 15 feet away and just stared at me. He wasn't it's what I called the 1,000-yard death stare. And I asked him again, and he put the beer bottle by the neck of the beer bottle. He was holding it. I got my dog out of the back of the car because I knew that was like a bat if he was to throw that. A few seconds later, I just go to approach him, and he does exactly what I thought he would do. He throws the beer bottle at me, but it smashes at my feet as opposed to hitting me. At that point, I had to arrest him. So I left my dog in a sit position by the patrol car. I went over, I said, you're under arrest. And as I put him on the hood of the car to apply the handcuffs, he raised himself up. Now, when you're bent over the front of the car, you know, I've got the higher elevation on the top of your back. And so his chest is on the hood. He pushes himself with all his might straight up. And I pushed with all my might. I couldn't push him down. And I was 250. My wife says 300 pounds, but I say 250. And he was probably 150 pounds soaking wet. Something we had always been trained for in policing, whether it be public or private, was they told us about if you could run into people who are high on drugs and alcohol and are impervious to pain. I didn't know if this was the case, but I couldn't push that man down. And he said to me, he says, you're not going to do anything. You're not applying those handcuffs to me. And he threw me out of the way. Literally, I was like a rag doll. And I was surprised by the strength that he had. So I re-engaged him, put him back on the hood. And again, we wrestled around, and the young fella and this man's friend stood there. My partner was frozen first night, but he had been to Iraq. This, you know, my employee, but he was frozen, and I had to yell at him, give me a hand, give me a hand. And when he got involved, the fight was on. We started to wrestle with this guy, the two of us, and he fought us both like nothing. I knew what I had was getting close to a very dangerous situation because I could feel the strength. And so after he began striking me and striking the young fella delivered a knee strike to the side of this man's leg that in training that we did for years, whether it be public or private police, that knee strike is trained to take the man down. I mean, it's, you know, the leg drops out. They just touched it and I fell. You know, this man's leg, I felt how the power was with that knee strike, and it didn't do anything to him. I called my trainee. I said, step back. I said, sir, put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest. And what he did is he said, you're not putting me in handcuffs. Do you want to go again? And he looked at me, and I was kind of winded from the fight, but I had no choice but to go back in, except this time I went with my dog. And I deployed my dog to him, to his one arm, and he began to fight me with the dog attached. And as I stepped back, he held the dog up in the air, and it was a Rottweiler, about 150 pounds. He raised the dog in the air and said, get this, and he used an expletive that I won't use here, get this dog off my arm, in a very calm tone. And he held his arm straight up. And in training, when the dog bites the guy always went down and gave up. This guy, he was causing me to disbelieve everything that I had been trained for. And so I called the dog off. I went back hand to hand with him. I took my baton out. I struck him with my baton, no result. Put the dog back into the fight because I was starting to black out. And the dog grabbed him by his other arm. And then he proceeded, with the dog attached, to tear his t-shirt in half, right down the middle, with his teeth, this man. And he took it and he wrapped his blood-soaked arm. And then I called the dog off. He wrapped the other blood-soaked arm with his other half of his t-shirt. I had never seen so much blood, nor had I ever been prepared in training for what an actual event would look like. I had never had to use the dog before, ever. Just his presence was enough, and people would submit into handcuffs. So I'm on my two-way radio, which goes to my office where my dispatcher sits, and I said, "Get the police out here right away. We're in a fight," and I'm screaming, "We're in a fight." And I go hands-on with this guy again, full of blood. He's swinging his arms. I'm trying to avoid getting hit with the blood. He literally still began to beat us both. My dispatcher tells the police dispatcher that I'm chasing somebody, not in a fight. She misheard, which delayed the priority of the call, slowed the police response. And when they arrived, it I went down for the man's legs. My partner went for his upper body. I said, let's try it one final time. And he fought us, even in midair, he fought us. And we finally got him on the ground and got him in handcuffs, and the police cruiser arrived. I was covered in blood. I was in shock. So as was my partner. But when the situation was over, the police sent us on our way. And when I got back to the office, a few of my employees that were coming in for the latter of the night shift all began to high-five me. "Good job. Wow, we heard, it was good. Boy, oh boy, that must have been so tough." And I put my hand up, but I didn't like what I felt. I didn't mean to hurt and didn't want to hurt anybody. I never had to. Sure, there was the odd scuffle, but nothing to this degree.
Mm-hmm.
And so after about 3 or 4 months after the event with this man, I had found out that he had just been released from a Canadian federal prison institution. And I most recently, as recently as 2 weeks ago, told a friend who works with the Canadian prison system, he's a guard, and I was recounting this story to him, and he said, "Oh, that's very common. They tear their shirt so that you can't get a hold of them. They rip it right off with their teeth." He says, "What you're telling me, I've seen 1,000 times in prison." So I didn't know I was dealing with a man who had been to federal prison, and I did find out later, multiple times. My luck, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and all the commotion brought out people from the neighborhood. And I'm going to go back to that scene just for a second. People were frozen in the street because of the carnage.
Right.
So 3 or 4 months later, when I would come home from night shift, and I began to hear voices calling me. And at first it sounded like my wife. And I'd say, yes. I turn around, I'd come home at 4 or 5 a.m. From a night shift. And I thought, strange, my wife is up, but yes, honey. And there was no one there. And in fact, she was sound asleep. That continued to grow. I continued then to have visual hallucinations. And so I'd be driving my security patrol car, as I had for all those years, 10 years with my own security company. And I'd be driving along the road and I would see fictitious people step out into the street and I would run them over. And then I would slam on the brakes because they just come out of nowhere. And my mind would reel because I thought I ran somebody over. And when I'd get out and I'd check underneath my car and there was nobody, I began to scream at the top of my lungs and cry. It was torturous. And it was then that I became aggressive at home with my little kids. If I tripped over their toys, I'd break that toy into a million pieces. I was always angry. I wanted to smash things, and it was all, I'm very mild-mannered, and I always have been. I don't have a mean bone. I really don't believe I have a mean bone in my body. But I was very angry, and that went on for a year until my wife said to me, and I had verbally told her I wanted a divorce. I had accused her of cheating. I was paranoid. I was suspicious. I was all of those things that I never was before. And she said to me, if you don't go to a doctor, I have to leave you for a while until you get straight, because there's something wrong. So I go to the doctor, I make an appointment, I said, please, I need my wife back. I need my wife back. I was desperate because she was the only thing that was holding me up. And I went to the doctor and he said, tell me what happened. And he says, you have classic signs of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yep.
I had only heard that term applicable to people coming back from the military, from combat in that theater. And I didn't know that it could happen to me, who I considered to be, I'd never been in the military, but I knew that the incident was traumatic for me in so many ways. He said, I'll put you on some lorazepam. And he says, and then I'm going to get you into some counseling, but it's going to take a good year to do that. And I said, I can't wait a year, sir. So I went privately. I paid out of my own pocket, and I entered into PTSD therapy with a cutting edge traditional therapist. Mm-hmm. And she used something called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And this is the basis in a nutshell is that you have to relive the experience over and over and over while these tones go back and forth in these headphones, and they process the memory of the event. And you're emoting. I'm screaming my head off and I'm asking her to stop. But when I left, after about 3 or 4 times of that, when I left, I felt lighter. I felt like something had happened. I'd had a breakthrough. The next 18 years were spent with that traditional therapist. And she said, well, now I've got something new I want to try with you. And she would ask my permission. And I said, okay. She said, but we got to go way back to when you were born. And in my head, after 18 years of traditional therapy, I had a psychiatrist that filled me full of every drug you could ever imagine. I was on drugs like crazy for my mood stabilizing, antidepressants, antipsychotics, you name it, I was on it. And my friend, who I considered her friend, in this traditional therapist, said that. I went a couple of sessions and I said to her, I can't. We just finished this, 18 years. We just finished this. I can't go back to doing this again. I said, I need a break. And when I took that break, which she said was fine to do, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I reconnected with an old friend by the name of Laura. And Laura, I hadn't seen in 20 years. I first met her in the middle of the wilderness in a place called Algonquin in Canada here, and it's hundreds and thousands of miles of nothingness. Within that forest, there existed a shaman, a native healer, a person who taught those ways. And it was by fluke that a friend came across her information and said to me, I know you're going through all this therapy, maybe this will work. And so I didn't know anything about shamanism. And so I decided to give it a try. I wanted to do something non-traditional to see if it would really help me better than the traditional stuff I had just left. So that's where I met Laura. 20 years later, she comes back on the scene. We connect on Facebook, and she says to me, I'm a life wellness coach. She goes, would you like to become a client of mine at no cost to you because you're my friend? I began just prior to beginning with her, I began to experience suicidal thinking that I hadn't experienced in 18 years. I started to experience the stress and the trauma and the flashbacks of PTSD, the anxiety. I developed social anxiety disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. I was, again, medicated for everything. I did 4 sessions with Laura, 4. And she was talking in such a way that I could totally grasp what she was saying, but seemed so surreal to me, how simple life really is in comparison to how everybody makes it out to be in our thinking, in our heads. And she showed me the path of surrender, to allow myself the opportunity to, and these are her words, become the silent observer of my feelings, whether they be anxiety, my thoughts, whether they be suicidal. And she goes, I just want you to take a step back, like on the side of a highway. If you were to park your car, get out of your car and go sit in the grass and watch the traffic go by. That's where I want you. And I'm saying that metaphorically speaking.
I understand.
And she says, because you don't want to be standing out in the traffic, you're going to get hit. Every word that she said made me sweat. And you remember what that means? It means I was so happy. It released in me all this energy that was being blocked by the label that was given to me of PTSD. When that label was given to me, I became that label. And I went through a huge, huge identity crisis. And I even almost changed my name. That's how bad PTSD affected me. So in 4 sessions, Laura was able to alleviate all of the suicidal thoughts, all of the anxiety. And I had done a lot of therapy, a lot of spiritual work, because I consider this journey with PTSD as a moving, living energy being. That's what PTSD is. It's alive. It has, and I'll say it for my own purposes, I believe this to be true. It has a consciousness.
Yes, it does.
And so the shaman said, you can speak to the consciousness of that PTSD or cancer or this or that. You can speak directly to it and ask it. Say, I'm thankful, I'm in gratitude for the experience that you've given me, but I would really like it if you would go now. And I think, I'm ready to do this on my own. And Laura provided that opportunity along with the shamanic training to be able to release this stuff, my stuff. Because when consciousness, I believe, shines through your stuff, it amplifies your stuff. And so I was able to let go of that stuff. Now, I loved what she did, what Laura did so much, that I learned from her over a long period of time. I studied, and I studied it with other thought leaders who had the same principles that she was teaching. And today, Frank, I am cured and alleviated. All my symptoms have been alleviated to the point that I feel freedom and enjoyment just in seeing a bird or a car pass. I mean, it gets right down to the very simplistic nature of what we're experiencing.
Exactly. I've heard stories like this multiple times, Shane. And I firmly believe and have been told there are no random acts. You didn't meet Laura by chance. You were ready and it was time. And I've also been told by a number of healers, including yourself, that PTSD, cancer, whatever, brings its own negative energy field.
Yes.
And that negative energy, and you get so much energy, correct?
Absolutely.
And if it's all being sucked up into the negative, you can't heal. Is that right?
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. Because, once the mind, if I can just go to the energy of the mind is very seductive, and it will tell you, come over here. I'll show you how to heal yourself. Just stick with me. And through Laura's teachings and my own learnings, I've come to realize that there's a huge liar in my town, and that is the mind. It will tell you what you want. So I have to go beyond my thinking, beyond what my mind is, that voice inside of you that keeps chattering at you that you're no good, or you are good, or come over here, you don't like this, you don't like that. All that goes away when you release that energy of the blockages and not listen to the mind, but listen to your heart. And one thing that I'll just go back and say is I'll never forget the day my therapist told me I could never go back to my dream job. She said to me, you have to quit law enforcement, because if you don't, you will continue to experience PTSD. The body, the consciousness will think it's still fighting. When you throw on that uniform, it will go back into a fight or flight response, and in some form or fashion, you will relive it. So I had to retire from my dream career, and I really, that uniform became a real identity for me. And when I lost it, it became an identity crisis.
Mhm.
No idea who I was until I met Laura. And when I met Laura, I knew who I was.
When you released the negative energy, then the positiveness, positive energy came back and filled that space, correct?
That is correct.
And that changed everything for you. So
Absolutely.
what changes occurred? What did you do?
In what sense, Frank?
Well, you couldn't be a police officer anymore.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, yes. I had a good friend, and my wife, I know when I was in the early stages after I got my diagnosis and I was on the medications and sitting on the couch like in a drug-induced coma from all the pharmaceuticals that were prescribed for me, she said, "We're drowning in debt. I lost my security company. You have to do something." And so a friend said to me, the same friend who sent me to the shaman, in fact, said to me, "You'd be a great Santa Claus." And I looked at him, and I didn't have a beard there wasn't even on my radar. I said, "A Santa Claus?" He said, "You're jolly and you're a bigger guy. And you could make some really, really good money being a professional Santa." And I went home with it, and I talked to my wife about it. And I went and had a costume professionally made for me, but I was wearing a wig and beard. And at Christmas time, I would go out. Well, and it was hard because getting dressed was hard. And when I went out to do my gigs as Santa Claus, I felt, I know this sounds really cliche, but I felt something very magical in what I was seeing in people's eyes.
Exactly.
And I knew that feeling made me feel like a great compliment to society, just like I had been when I was with the police department, but even more so, more of a loving energy exchange between me and the people that I met. I grew my beard in with my wife's permission. She's 7 years younger than I am, and I said, "I'm gonna look really old next to you." I'm 7 years, ahead of her, not much farther. And she said, "That's okay. You do what you got to do. It's bringing money in, and I really appreciate you doing that." So I grew my beard in until people called her my granddaughter and said, "Oh, is this your granddaughter?" And I said, "No, that's my wife." For heaven's sake, "Oh, are these your grandchildren?" "No, they're my kids." I knew I had achieved the Santa look.
Yeah, you did.
And so when I was, a year after year began to pass, and I was doing Santa, every time Christmas came around, I would do Santa, and I was becoming more in demand, more pressure, and I was starting to crack a little bit because I hadn't met Laura yet, understand. I was still doing traditional therapy. I began to crack under the pressure of having to be so many places at once and always in a happy mood, putting on this act. But at times it wasn't an act, and so I didn't understand. And I got too much in my head, and it almost finished me again. And to the point where I said, I don't think I can put on the Santa suit. And my wife said, that's okay, but we have to find you something. I went off on disability, and disability in Canada allows you to do Santa Claus and make so much money before before they start taxing you on it and cutting your disability off.
Correct.
And so I went out and I did it, and things really got better after I met Laura. My Santa seasons, it wasn't so hard to put on the costume anymore. It wasn't so hard to spend 12 hours smiling and taking pictures with tourists. And we're a very tourist area near Niagara Falls.
Yep.
So, I was seeing thousands of people a day. I was in hundreds of pictures and photographs. And sometimes I was crying inside. Other times people would elate me, and give me some wonderful energy to work with. I'm thankful to say, as you'll be able to see behind me on the wall at my Santa picture there, that I'm still Santa Claus at Christmas time, because it does bring me so much joy. And that is something that I have continued to do, in addition to running now my own life, what I call a life auxiliary business, in which I support people the same way Laura supported me. And I can come at it from a perspective of understanding people with mental health issues. I can be right there with them, because in my unique way, I experience much, not all, much of what they experience. And the first thing I tell them, Frank, is don't battle this. Don't use words like, I'm going to fight this, whatever it is, bipolar disorder, whatever, it's PTSD. I'm going to fight this and cancer and win. And I said, first of all, you have to eliminate that language, because anything that you're going to fight with is going to fight back. And I can guarantee you're going to lose. It's the speaking energy. It's the energy, you can't ask it on one hand to leave you, and on the other hand, put on some boxing gloves and say, and if you don't leave, we're going to have a big fight.
Exactly. You have become, Shane, through Santa Claus, through this, you have become an energy source.
Yes.
And the people who listen, and I've heard other people say this, who've been similar experiences, you allow them to release the negative and then fill it with your positive energy. And we interviewed one very high-powered attorney who had cancer and who named it, and who went with the energy, just a series of joy and positivity, to the point where the cancer was gone. Your PTSD, and I was in the military, and I dealt with a lot of United States military veterans who 20, 30, 40 years later are still battling, are still impacted by PTSD, because no one has brought them this energy source.
Yes. And the nice thing of, and really, that's too bad that is still the way, Frank. What I'll say is that we have to be taught differently, as we've been talking, you and I, in order to deal with these things. And if people think that language and that language doesn't have an energy, well, you've got to first think, where did that energy start? It started in your head. It started in your mind. I don't like this. I hate it. Go away. I hate cancer. And I hate this, and I hate PTSD. And believe me, I was there. I rode the roller coaster for years. Until the shaman and Laura taught me that I didn't, that the language produces an energy which is conflicting to what you actually spoke with the illness about. And so when I hear people, and I hear some descriptive language, as I'm sure you do, about these different ailments, you're doing yourself a disservice to healing.
Exactly. That's a great point. Shane, we're just about out of time. This has been a fascinating story. I just enthralled hearing it again. Well, what last thoughts or words of wisdom do you want to leave with the viewers today?
Don't let your thinking or your mind, don't believe it. It is, I will say again, the biggest liar in the room, because it is manipulated from birth. From birth, It's been manipulated to be somebody else. Your teachers, your parents, all the broken people who were broken themselves, you became all those people. And that's stuck in your mind. And you said, that is the way to live life. And you wonder why we have problems today. So don't believe the mind. Don't believe the thinking. Take a step back, sit on the edge of the highway, and really watch all that heavy traffic volume go by, and be the silent observer when you're starting to feel pressured by your illness or problems. Take a step away and look over at it, but don't get caught in the storm that it provides.
Absolutely. Well, as I said, ladies and gentlemen, we're just about out of time. I want to thank Shane again. This is just an amazing story. And those of you who have said, well, energy healing, yes, no, yes, it's real.
Yes.
It's real. And
Yes.
energy has power, and that power can change your life as it did for Shane. Now, ladies and gentlemen, no matter what life throws at you, and you just heard a bunch of stuff that Shane's gone through in his life, no matter what these obstacles are, look up, get up, never, ever give up. Better times and better people will come into your life. There are no random acts. Just like Laura was not a random act for Shane.
Well said.
Now, if you'd like more information about Shane, contact me. I'll make sure it gets to him. You can watch this on ROKU TV or on my YouTube channel, Frank Zaccari. And if you do see it on YouTube, please subscribe. And let me leave you with this, ladies and gentlemen. None of us are in this alone. And the secret to walking on water is to know where the rocks are. And today, Shane showed us where many of those rocks are. Join me again next week. We'll look at another life-altering event. Thanks again, Shane.
Thank you, and thank your viewers. Frank, it's been a pleasure.